Elmwood native Nelson Dean Jay isn't exactly a household name, but Bill Engelbrecht aims to change that. On this episode of Postmark Peoria, Steve Tarter interviews Engelbrecht, co-author of The American Banker in Paris.
It really is surprising. As I mentioned, Nelson Dean Jay's name, I get a big who. And you simply, in my opinion, you simply cannot name anybody from Central Illinois who really has had this much influence on America and maybe even certainly Europe and to some small extent the world that this man had, and nobody knows about him.
And he, just to give a little background, banker, I mean, obviously the title, American Banker in Paris, grew up in Elmwood. How did he get to Europe? Because, you know, we're saying Paris, so how did that happen?
Well, he grew up in Elmwood, as you mentioned, and then from there he went to Knox College in Galesburg, and from there he went into finance in Milwaukee, and then into World War I. And while in World War I, he did some amazing things there, and he was decorated. And I'm still stunned by this. There's a lot of great people who've done great things in war. This man was decorated by 4 countries after World War I, and did this. And while he was after the war, he bumped into some folks that were associated with J.P. Morgan, and J.P. Morgan himself, the old man, came calling one day and said that he would like to have Nelson Dean Jay go to Paris because he had some problems. J.P. Morgan had some problems with his bank in Paris, and said, would you take over my bank in Paris? And, of course, how do you turn that one down?
Let's see, Paris in the 1920s, well, that was the place, wasn't it?
My gosh. They had just passed the inability for you to drink here in the United States, so if you were an adventurous person, you sort of headed for Paris. And so it was the Roaring '20s. He came in the door with everybody else in the Roaring '20s in Paris.
And obviously, his accomplishments there were such that, you know, what happened after that? I mean, obviously you have a huge J.P. Morgan behind you. Where did that lead?
Well, you know, he was president of the bank, and during the Roaring '20s, became some of the most interesting things that Nelson Dean Jay did, and just incredible interactions with people like Madame Marie Curie. I find it interesting sometimes when I mention Madame Marie Curie to young people, I get another who. But for those of the rest of us, probably the most accomplished female scientist ever. And two Nobel prizes. And anyway, he helped financially. He helped her start oncology institutions in Warsaw and in Paris. He spent time with Charles Lindbergh. Ernest Hemingway was an associate of his, as was people associated with the Nazi regime. He had to. He was a banker, and so financially there were interactions there. So those are just a few of the people that he spent time with.
Bill, we're talking with Bill Engelbrecht about the book that he's co-written with Carl Taylor about Nelson Dean Jay. American Banker in Paris is the name of the book. You mentioned, or had mentioned online, that he welcomed Lindbergh to Paris after the transatlantic flight, which of course was a huge thing, but later criticized Lindbergh to his face for what? His views about Germany or America, the America First thing, or what was that about?
Yeah, let me just back up 1 second
sure.
on Lindbergh going to Paris. Very few people know that one of the reasons Lindbergh was able to get to Paris is he had to have some sponsors. Well, surprise, surprise, the sponsor, one of the big sponsors of the flight was the J.P. Morgan Company. Oh. And so when he landed in Paris, in his jacket pocket was a business card. And the business card was the person in charge of the welcoming committee in Paris. The business card was Nelson Dean Jay. Now, wait a minute. This guy was a kid from Elmwood, Illinois, and he was welcoming Charles Lindbergh to Paris.
Amazing.
And just amazing. So again, to finish up on your question, yes, there's sort of tattered history to Charles Lindbergh, and he started to become sort of friendly to the Nazis.
Right.
And he thought they were just wonderful in what they were doing. He got some awards, interestingly enough, from the support of the United States as well. But Nelson Dean Jay told him, hey, in so many words, you sort of need to knock it off. And he actually told him to pipe it down a little bit and maybe take a little time in the Austrian Alps with his kids, maybe to get himself straightened out. And then he did some other, Lindbergh did some other strange things. Lots of books about him, but at the same time, he had an association with Nelson Dean Jay for 40 years. And their wives, interestingly enough, were very close, closer than Lindbergh and Nelson were. And in the book, you'll find a incredibly warm and very moving letter from Anne Lindbergh to Anne Jay, that's Nelson's wife. And toward the end of the book, it'll sort of get you a little verklempt. It's such a warm relationship between the two. We mentioned the name of the book being, The American Banker in Paris. This isn't a book about a banker. This isn't a book about finance. This is a book about an interesting human being that came out of Central Illinois and did some just remarkable things.
And thanks to you and Carl for writing this and kind of alerting us about it. Is Elmwood, are they likely to do something? I mean, has that been brought up? Because I'm thinking, I don't know what you would do, at this juncture. It's many years later, but you think they'd want to honor one of their favorite sons or something like that? Yes,
I've spent quite a bit of time talking with some of the leaders out in Elmwood, and we've got the book in the libraries, and we're talking about introducing it into the Elmwood school system as something to be. And I made some suggestions that at some point we need to get some kind of a banner up there.
Sure.
We need some kind of distinguishing notification that Elmwood is the seat of this guy. But and by the way, Nelson Dean Jay and his wife are both buried in Elmwood these days. But yes, and there are a few distant relatives still hanging around Elmwood out there.
How long did he live? What was his age when he died? Nelson Dean Jay.
Yeah, he was 91 when he passed away, and it was in 1972, I believe. And so he was sort of in his latter years not well, nor was his wife, but had a long, productive life and was a personality. Sort of bigger than life as a person.
Did he come back to Elmwood periodically?
Oh, yeah. He came back to Elmwood a number of different times. He came back, and he was honored by Knox College when he had come back.
Sure.
Not often, because he was in World War I. He was in World War II. He was a busy man, and relatives and stuff were still back here. So he traveled back and forth somewhat frequently.
Postmark Peoria is a co-production of WCBU and Mike Sable. If you want even more stories about Peoria history, subscribe to the Postmark Peoria podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, or the NPR app.